Welcome to the latest edition of Leadership Actually. It's not love, it's leadership actually. Welcome, Lisa Powney.
Welcome, Lee Rogers. How are you?
I am really good, thank you. Really good.
We're at home today, so these are our kitchens.
I know,
A
I've even,
kitchen
look, I
podcast.
don't, look, apples, flowers, I've done it all. Done it all. I've even cleared the work surfaces for you.
I've faced the opposite way, so you can't actually see what's going on in the kitchen.
And welcome to our guest, Wayne Cartmel. And if I just say, Wayne is the co-founder of My New Term. He's got a really inspiring, inspirational story that has absolutely captured my imagination. And I think sharing this today, I think leaders will get a lot from what it takes to have determination, to have some trials and tribulations along the way. And I'm really curious to hear about how he feels now that he's starting to see fruits bear, if you like, with all his efforts over the last 10 years. So, welcome, Wayne.
Welcome.
Real pleasure to be here, Lisa.
Really nice to meet you, Wayne. Really good to be here.
Great stuff. So, we're going to really look at the messy bits as well as almost like the shiny bits as well, and understand a little bit more about tech and tech development, because it's talked about quite a lot. We often see the end product of stuff, but we don't necessarily hear about what it takes to actually get there. So really, let's explore that as we go through.
Brilliant. I think this is a really interesting topic, and I am excited to hear your story, Wayne. I've been in the world of leadership and also working with a lot of leaders at the moment. I've only had, calls this week. They often see such opportunities for change and for moving things forward, and can be, if you listen, can be the voice of, this could be different. This is something that could really help. The challenge is, though, how do they get that over the line? And I've been involved in that. I've seen some great initiatives. I've quite creative thinking, and but how to stand your ground, to get this over the line, to persuade, to provide the business case. Sometimes that goes over, has gone over my head. I'll just be more enthusiastic and try and push that forward. But I'm really looking forward to hearing how you did that. What did you see in terms of the opportunity, and how that has helped shape where you are today? So really pleased to hear that. What about you, Lee? How are you looking forward to this conversation?
Yeah, I think that what you've just said resonates massively, actually, in terms of I've had so many ideas in the past, right? And we all have lots of ideas, particularly in the shower in the morning. Actually, I don't know why, but
All right.
or on a walk, this is real. We said that, but actually, like joining, like making something and being really focused on a niche of something that you can differently, and being really passionate and then to go and see it through. Yeah, that's the bit that I'm really curious about, because I've had lots of ideas, but they just remain that, or on other podcast episodes that we'll look at, is almost like the commerciality. Why does that idea, would that not work commercially? And what are the ingredients to know? How do we help leaders listening to this think, how do I take an idea and then move it forward, whether that be internally within an organization, or whether that's actually externally as part of a solution provider, and some of the things. So why don't we just kick off and ask you, Wayne, just to share your My Term journey, and we'll go from there and explore it deeper, if that's okay.
Great.
Absolutely fine. Yeah, no problem at all. And touching on that, what you just said, Lee, about people having lots of ideas, and you will often hear people say, oh, why doesn't somebody just go and do this thing? People identify the problem, but very few people actually then take the opportunity to explore that further and really run with it as a problem. And ultimately, that is all I've done. I identified a problem, and that problem being was when I was training to teach, and I went into teaching. I identified the process to apply for jobs in education. And for any listeners that are involved in education in any way, shape or form, not just teachers, but anyone working in a school or that may have applied to education before, Lee, I know that you've obviously worked in education. You will know the application process to apply for jobs within the sector is often a barrier for many people. And the reason being is because schools and multi-academy trusts and people within education have to comply with keeping children safe in education. So there's a really long, lengthy application form, whereas perhaps obviously in the commercial world, there isn't. People can apply using a CV, a personal statement, etc. So I identified that that was an issue and wanted to do something about it. I thought that there was a way to standardise the process. And what I did at the time was with my peer group of other teachers, I asked them, was it just me that was experiencing this problem? Was it more than that? And I identified that absolutely it wasn't just me at all. But I also asked them, where do they typically go looking for jobs, and what is it? Where would they typically go and find? And this was now over 10 years ago that I did this exercise, and this was before I even started a business. And again, they kind of gave me some research, and I've still got the results of that survey today in terms of what people told me about where they were looking. And there was a very clear monopoly that kind of existed about where people typically looked. There was more local sources as well, but there was a very clear kind of winner there. But then I also went and asked school leaders. I went and asked them, like, what is their experience of recruitment and the application process and things. And we've talked about for a long time now about a recruitment crisis within education. There is obviously various subjects and specialisms that there is a real shortage of qualified people. I was one of those people. I was a maths teacher, and I knew I was really high in demand, if you like, and I couldn't believe that all of these barriers were placed in front of me to apply for a role in education, and to the point that I was even directed to agencies in some cases to actually apply. And then when I found out how much schools were spending on recruitment, I just thought that this isn't the way that it needs to be. There is a clear problem here, and it's just waiting for somebody to go and fix. And I thought, why not me? Really naively. And there's many a day since then I wish that it maybe wasn't me, because it's been, full of trials and tribulations, and it's certainly from a straight line trajectory that's got us here today. Um, but the first time that I did it, and just to share this for people that are listening, it did fail. So I had the idea, I'd done some research, and I went about doing it, and I kind of worked with this sort of agency to develop the technology to do it. It did fail, and it failed because I didn't have I knew what I wanted in my mind and what it would look like, but I didn't have the ability to then convey that to a development team, and I'd never had any experience of doing any tech whatsoever. And ultimately, the product that they developed in the tech that it was never going to work, and it was never going to take off. And as a result of that, it was a really hard moment when I've invested several thousands of pounds of my own money into something to then ultimately make the decision that this isn't going to go anywhere. I've now got to kind of just park it and move on. So that is what happened the first time that I attempted to do what is the same thing that I've now gone on to do a second time.
Loads of questions have just popped in my head. So Lisa, I was like, tell me a little bit about like what that meant at home. What were the implications of that? Were you working full time on it, or was it a part-time project? Because again, there's some of the nuances, if you like, of this. So I understand that you've tried something that's failed, but what was some of the impact, not just on you personally, but also, I guess, around the people around you, even friends, or how was that?
Yeah, so I mean, at the time, and even a long time after I then went a second time, I was doing ultimately multiple roles. So I was a newly qualified teacher at the time, so that in itself is more than a full-time job when you're first into teaching and all the pressures and demands that brings upon you. I was also tutoring just for extra income, so I went and did some private tutoring. And I'm also a football referee as well, so I therefore was obviously going and doing that. And it was partly about obviously earning money to obviously then try and do this thing on the side, but it was also it was about de-risking. When you've got a full-time role, it was just about doing something on the side in any opportunity and any moment that I could, to just try and explore and get this thing going. And as much as I didn't want it to fail, and the intention was that this was going to be a thing, that was obviously always my mindset. The fact that it did, it meant that I had de-risked by not going all in. I'd not from day one said, right, I'm quitting my job and I'm not going to do anything apart from this, because at that point, you've got nothing. So that's what it looked like at the time. It did naturally have strains on family and other things, because you're obviously working an awful lot just to stay afloat.
And if you had that first round time again, what were the key lessons that you took out of that? Because obviously you went on to do some more successful stuff. So what were the big things that you took from that?
Yeah. As I look back now, the one thing I would say is that failure, if you want to call it, and it was probably the best thing that happened. And that might sound really strange in saying that, but people should really embrace failing. And even now, in like what we're now doing within the business, we're doing numerous things that will potentially fail. Like there will be experiments that we will go and conduct and think that will obviously go on to prove to be something, and actually it doesn't. And they're examples within the business now. But when you're starting anything, whatever that thing may be, in the journey of that business, just embrace that failure, because when you are starting a business, you only have to look at the stats that are out there that are very public, that 90% of businesses will fail within 5 years, and you can look at it particularly for your niche as well and find that the stats are even more than that, for example. As long as you expect that is the case and have that mindset, the key thing is that when and if that moment does occur, don't just keep going on blasé. Actually cut the cord and go, you know what, that's probably the time that actually we need to pivot, or actually say that this isn't the thing and we've not maybe identified that there's a real problem there.
I really love that I smiled so much when you said that, because that's such an important lesson. But I also smiled because you used the word experiment. I've been watching and reading books called Tiny Experiments,
Yeah.
which is the scientific way of dealing with these kind of things. So, they don't have failure because everything's an experiment, so everything that you do either has some kind of result, negative, positive, moves you forward, but it always tells you something. And I think that's a great way of looking at the world, isn't it? So I love the fact that you embraced it, but also you said experiments, and I think, really loads.
And you will find that there are things that really surprise you both ways. Things that you thought would really take off and that would, be a really good addition, in our case, to the platform potentially, and things that absolutely are just a complete flop. And that, we spent and invested so much time and effort into this thing, but that's all part of it. And I've been through numerous really big pivots with the business, and it's from where we are now to what I had the original idea of. It's completely different. I never envisaged it would be what it is today, and what you envisage that your business is just dying out today to what it will be in 5 and 10 years will be very, very different.
So just on that, what are some of the things to help you be really aware of where you need to pivot? External conditions, market forces, government changes, interventions. What would you say to listeners or watchers to this? What should they be aware of?
So the thing that I would always say is that you can only control what you can control. So things like external economic factors, they're out of your control broadly. And something like COVID that I've obviously been through and had a really terrible experience during that period, it was out of my control. And you've got to kind of separate it, that's not something that you can kind of manage. But maybe if I talk about an example about where we really pivoted what we did. So in late 2019, we kind of got to a stage whereby we had proven that the model of what we'd got would work, so that candidates could register on our platform, search available vacancies, and apply directly to employers. We proved that actually with the limited number of schools that we were working with, in a very, very condensed geographical region, that this was a thing. This was something that actually was working. But we were effectively confined to just Bedfordshire. That's kind of where we'd focused our efforts on building relationships with employers and schools and multi-academy trusts, and where we then focused our advertising reach. And I was at that point thinking, how do we get this beyond that and to a bigger scale? And it was in doing that kind of analysis, and I did try and go into some other geographies that were very close and just realised how difficult it was going to be. And I realised that we needed to do a big pivot at that point. The market had moved on, and in that case, multi-academy trusts had really started to establish themselves within the market. And I saw that there was a real opportunity to kind of really target multi-academy trusts that were obviously national and growing. But in order to do that, they had very different problems, and they had very different kind of needs of why they would obviously want our solution. So we pivoted to become an applicant tracking system, which, up until not long before then, I'd never really heard of what an applicant tracking system was and what benefit that would bring. But that was a really big pivot that we did. And having then done the research to obviously understand and work really closely with customers, we were then able to do that, with relative success, and actually then kind of grow beyond that.
Amazing. And it's so important. I love those kind of stories that you're able to kind of have your plan A, and then your plan B becomes your plan A, kind of, the pivot is it. I think sometimes we miss that. We haven't talked about it yesterday, didn't we, Lee? If you don't sometimes think about the what if scenarios and, really face into, well, what if this doesn't work in some of the areas? Sometimes the best ideas and the best, ways forward come out of, those conversations. Sometimes it's given to us by COVID, but actually if we had that way of looking at the world, that we scenario planned a little bit more, sometimes you get an even better way, don't you, a third way. So that is fantastic. So that's your pivot story, but I guess on the journey that it failed, what happened next? What was the next part of that story?
Yeah. So after it failed, and like I say, I'd put several thousands of pounds of my own money and hundreds of hours of time into obviously this as an idea and as a concept. It was quite devastating. Obviously that, oh gosh, I'm going to be confined to the world of employment. On a personal level, I've got a degree with business with finance. I graduated with that in 2012, and you would think that really sets you up to obviously being an entrepreneur. It doesn't in the slightest, unfortunately, because it's a completely different skill. Whereas what I then went and did was basically just went back to my full-time employment, and I focused on obviously my teaching at the time, but I couldn't let it go. And around about 6 months went on, and during that time there was something called innovation vouchers. It was by what was the Technology Strategy Board, which is now called Innovate UK, government sort of project, and it was really bizarre. They don't do it anymore, unfortunately, but you could apply for what was effectively a lottery to win £5,000. But this £5,000 could only be used with academics at universities. It wasn't like you got the £5,000; it went to obviously these academics. It was every 3 months, and you entered the lottery with the business idea. And if it was deemed a valid business idea and you got drawn out the hat, you obviously won. I went through 3 rounds of that, and then eventually on the 3rd round, we actually won.
Yay!
So we won with supposedly £5,000. It turns out £5,000 for university academics doesn't get you very far. Albeit, what it did get us is I went back to the University of Bedfordshire and the Research and Innovation Service, and I said, look, I've now got this. Can you now help us? Because I want to do it properly. These are the lessons that I've learned. This is where it went wrong. I knew exactly where it went wrong, and it was all about the technology side. And they then said, right, I'll set you up with a couple of computer science academics. And these are just mind-blowingly intelligent, unbelievable people that, go way over my head. But what they did do is they gave us that real basis as to this is how you should look at structuring it based upon the idea that you've got. And as much as from a practical level, they didn't necessarily do a lot, they gave us that real foundation and direction that was so needed. At the same time, I put a really scrappy advert on the university notice board looking for a volunteer student to basically come and help, develop this platform. And to my amazement, some people actually applied. And one of those people today is effectively the person that is now our CTO and has worked on the project ever since. He's the one that's developed the platform from scratch from that very first interaction. So he did it as his university master's dissertation, and obviously then won an award at the end of that. And we then went on to develop the platform. But in doing so, I then went to work in EdTech and was working full time. Obviously, he was full time. So this was weekends, bank holidays, like till 3 a.m. in the morning at the university library on a Sunday. So it was just incredibly hard work, and this went on for years, that we were just in the background. Nobody was obviously watching, nobody could see what we were doing. We were just developing this technology, but I could really see that we were starting to develop something. So that's what happened on the next phase of the journey.
Wow. And what kept you going? I know, what kept you going? I mean, not only have you done that, you've like inspired a future innovation in somebody else, but what kept you going in the background for years? How many years?
Well, it was 4 years before we made our first penny with the business, and we've ultimately developed a marketplace where obviously candidates can search for jobs and employers can apply. So unlike maybe, I'll say, a traditional recruitment agency that you can kind of spin up and get going, overnight, really, if you really wanted to and had the skills to do that, this was something that was going to take a long time. A marketplace as a business to get buyers and sellers, if you want to call it in that way, a bit like an eBay, it's really, really difficult, as it so turns out. It was my naivety that didn't realise how difficult it would be. So the tech development went on for several years. But what got me through, Lisa, is during that phase, we couldn't afford any even co-working space. Like, we had zero money, no funding. We've never had any funding. We've been fully bootstrapped to date. So therefore, we worked in the university library for a long time, and therefore, because we were both ex-students at the university, we got that free. But then they shut the university library. So unfortunately, we got kicked out of there, and we had to go to the pub. We worked in the pub for years, and
I love that.
Yeah, that is just how this thing started, and I knew which one I preferred.
More pub meetings, love it.
Honestly, there's so much that resonates with that, Wayne. Just listen, not on that scale, but in terms of that, even the born of this podcast, it was a it was a message on LinkedIn going, I've got this idea, who wants to join me? Is someone willing enough to spend a little bit of time to do it? Genuinely resonates. And equally, I often think, and it's like some of the best innovations happen when you're really constricted, where you've got to overcome, if money's no object, you just go, you do it, and it kind of flies. You're describing a story where you've had to innovate, you've had to duck and weave, you've had to make do. And I can't wait to speak to your CTO, quite frankly, about like what have you done for him and inspiring. I remember going to a university when I worked with as part of a talent program leader, and we spoke to some of the students, and we did a hackathon, similar thing, right? Using the company data, and what they come up with was it blew every single one of our minds. It was incredible, and that was their thing that they would just do BAU like normally. And what we realised is we had to look at like data insight in a whole profound different way. We thought we were going to them to give them an opportunity to showcase their talent. It completely flipped it, and we're like, we've got so much to go and learn and drive and future capabilities. And I think if you accelerate that 10 years, as in your story, it's going, well, how does that now be the absolute foundation of what we do?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I could see that, absolutely. Well, answer that, Wayne. Yeah, how did it keep you going? How did you keep resilient in that pub all that time?
Yeah, a lot of it is about resilience and just keeping on going. But the one thing that I never doubted is that it would work. Because I'd researched enough to know that this was a problem, and it was, every year I was seeing, on Twitter about teachers complaining and people within education that, oh my God, why is it so difficult to apply for jobs? It takes me hours, and I felt as though that there was people weren't necessarily listening to candidates and the importance of the candidate experience. And because I'd lived it, I knew that that was the problem. And if we focus on the candidate experience and making that better for people, then employers will benefit, enormously from that. And I had the North Star, effectively. The North Star has always been, how do we standardise the application process to apply for jobs in education? And because there's always been that, all of our team have always known that, we all know what we're working towards. And yes, from a product perspective, it continues to change and will continue going forward and evolve and move on, all, customer driven effectively. But still, I remain really focused on our niche and focused on delivering on that mission that we set out from the very beginning.
And being in the project world, scope creep is a real thing all the time.
Yeah.
People lose that North Star, and you get excited by the different opportunities that comes your way, and you forget the real reason why you were doing some of that stuff. So that's a really important part of your journey. So for me, the embracing failure and experimenting so far, getting some expert help any which way you can, and getting them to believe in your North Star, and then keeping focused on that has kept you going. So what was your pinch me moment? When did you go, bloody hell, this is happening? When did that happen?
Yeah, there's been so many over the years at different milestones, if you like, but there's one that's always stood out to me, and that was after what was nearly 4 years. It was in 2017 when we got our first candidate apply directly through the system to a school, and that application went direct to that school, and it was that first line in the database, if you like, where the candidate has actually gone on to apply for a role. It was that milestone moment. I was like we're on to something here. We've kind of got that, and since that day, last month alone, over 55,000 candidates applied in last month alone. But we just had to start with one. And the thing that I always say with people is, you've got to start, everything starts with one. Once you got one, you can get two, and once you got two, you can then build on that. And the flywheel just continues to grow in our case because the momentum that we've now got behind us. But that was a real milestone moment that I was like, yeah, we really onto something if we can continue just innovating and fixating on that problem.
That surprised me in a really nice, positive way, because maybe I'd think, oh, it was when I got my first, client, or people were investing in this, but actually it's a very humble, just the first person to apply, made all the difference. And you talk about that, the difference it's making to 55,000 people is a really humble way of looking at it. So that's a really great moment, and milestones that you're looking at that. So 55,000, what has that meant for your life? So is this your full-time career now, or?
Yeah, more than a full-time career. What it's meant for my life, it takes an awful lot of it. Yeah, because again, we're now dealing with scale, and we're growing an awful lot every single year, and that brings its own challenges. And we're always innovating, and we're always trying to add the next things. And again, that brings its own challenges. Once you're constant, we're pushing up new developments, twice a week, every week, or bug fixes and whatever those things might be. But when you've got tens of thousands of users using a platform at any one time, it brings challenges. And there have been many challenges throughout the journey as we've scaled to get to where we are today. But we know, and I've forecast that growth is set to continue, hopefully.
And just to add from my point of view, Wayne, we've talked about 55,000 candidates applying to the system. I know firsthand, because I was the director of a multi-academy trust, the people director, is the benefit it can have for multi-academy trusts, and the other side of the coin where it's such a valuable tool. Do you want to just share some of that in terms of feedback that you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our case, we do obviously have the two different user types. We've obviously candidates that are looking and applying for their next role, and we've got obviously employers that are using our system to manage the end-to-end recruitment process. So employers are, the ones that are paying to use the system. They're our paying customers. But from a school or a multi-academy trust, and it doesn't matter how much recruitment they do. They could be a really small village primary school, or they could be a huge national multi-academy trust. Managing a recruitment process in education, there is a huge amount of workload involved in it every single time that you recruit. And where we're now at is that we're by the applicant tracking system of choice within the education sector, used by nearly 5,000 schools now. And there are just huge efficiency savings and benefits that they can achieve by streamlining the recruitment process. So where they typically might have had a manual application process for candidates to apply, so an application form over email, word-based, etc. Instead, they can obviously utilise our applicant tracking system. Every candidate can be managed online. You can track them through the process. There's automated emails, text messages, you can do references, you can schedule interviews, you can do much of that recruitment process and onboarding directly through the platform, and save yourself so much time and therefore less resource required, but also improve that candidate experience. And going back to obviously the reason that was set out, the recruitment process is your shop window as an employer, such an important part of that journey as you're looking to attract talent. And therefore, how can we make it as easy and as seamless for anyone that's applying, whether they're a cleaner, a TA, or a CEO? It doesn't matter. How can we enhance that application process, even if somebody is not successful first time round? Our focus has always been on that, and our reviews that we've got now on Google, I think there's probably about 7,000 Google reviews on there, a really kind of testament to how our focus on that kind of experience and ultimately the benefits that employers get from digitising their recruitment process.
I've got one more question, Lisa, if that's all right, and then I'll hand over to you to finish. What's been the hardest thing throughout your journey as a leader?
There's many hard things, but I think the one thing that I'd say is that throughout this journey from really small, scrappy startup founder, it's how you have to grow personally and professionally, and what that looks like throughout that journey as you start to manage a team and then a bigger team, and then equally obviously we now partner with some of the largest multi-academy trusts in the country, for example, and from a relationships perspective and a brand, and obviously managing a brand. It's about that transition and about how you manage that from a leadership perspective, and realise that you need to change personally as the business changes.
And have you had any support in that?
I have, yeah. So to date, we've done this bootstrapped, so we've not raised any external funding whatsoever, purely because in those early days nobody would have invested in this thing. Obviously I was putting a lot of my own money into it. I got myself into over £100,000 worth of personal debt to kind of fund it, and as a result of that, it now means that we can control our own destiny, having got to where we are. But in doing so, it can be quite a lonely journey, because we don't necessarily have that kind of support that we might from a larger organisation or people, etc. So I joined a peer group. I joined a peer group of other practical founders, and these are practical founders across the world, and we meet monthly. And we have a video call. We've also got an in-person get together next month as well, and it's just good to be able to listen to other people and know that actually in many cases people, in my case, that people are also got B2B SaaS businesses, that they're experiencing the same problems that you are typically, and that we can help and support one another in terms of what that looks like. And it's led by somebody very experienced and that has done this game for a long time, and it's just good to be able to lean on other people, and know that you're kind of not alone in that case.
Amazing. And before I go, that final lesson is really important. But I do want to know, what's your aspiration? Like, where would you like, or where do you see this going? If all your dreams came true with it, where would it go?
Again, it goes back to the original, really, that when I set out on this journey, it was to bridge the gap between candidates and employers, and how we can connect directly people applying for jobs in education, schools and candidates. And I firmly believe that My New Term can be the platform, certainly across this country, whereby we can get to the stage that when you're applying for a job in education, that My New Term is the place that you apply, and it standardise the process. I was at an event only yesterday in London, and there was a couple of candidates that have got several jobs through My New Term now as a result, and they didn't even realise that there were other things that they potentially could be utilising, because they just see it. And we're effectively just replicating that across the country and really trying to grow that for the benefit of everybody, for the benefit of candidates and the pains that I faced, but equally to really save employers a huge amount of time, but also a huge amount of money on recruitment advertising spend, and obviously the cost to recruit more generally. So it's about just continuing to work on our mission to standardise that recruitment process. We continue day by day on that journey.
And I believe you, Wayne. I think that'll happen. I think you've got a really true mission out there. And although we talk about the education platform, there's probably other areas where this could be really viable as well. But a true-hearted mission to make that happen, with a lot of ups and downs along the way, but lots of lessons that we had. And I love the final one. You're so right. In terms of, as your business changes, but as you go up the leadership ladder, it's the same. That the business changes, the leadership changes, and you have to change yourself. What worked at that stage will not apply the same way. And if we're not willing to do that and grow, then we're not going to move forward. And that's a really great. You've got on a lot of those different missions. And the final part is the lonely job. The higher people get in organisations and owning their own businesses, it's a lonely place, and all those decisions that you're taking on yourself, and people do not ask for help. And so finding your peer groups and those people who can champion you and mentor is a really good lesson too. So I think we've got really great lessons that people can take from your journey. It's been absolutely fantastic to meet you, Wayne. I've always been someone who says, oh, that's got legs, so I might just go forward with something now. You've inspired me, rather than just stay there. A really great conversation. Thank you, Lee, once again.
Thank you, Lisa.
Really enjoyed that conversation.
Well, thanks once again for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks.